So, can you hear me now?
Yes, Anirban, you're back. Everything
Yes,
okay?
yes.
Yes,
So,
I can
on
hear
behalf
you.
of Sahapāthshālā, I welcome you all. Sahapāthshālā is a literary forum principally based in Kolani, a small town, rather a coastal town on the outskirts of the city of Kolkata, which involves a small group of people engaging with and discussing critical philosophical texts with the aim of collectively building a deeper understanding of the text presented. Critical connections, the networkings amongst and between text, and thereby looks deeply into the limits of the translatability of philosophies. This time, Sahapāthshālā is going to engage with Prasanta Chakravarty's recently published book, Attention and Drift, Santayana and Cavell in the present, and welcomes the author and the discussions to distinguished scholars, Professor Stanley and Dr. Kalyan Kumar Das, so as to immerse in deep, engaging, incisively critical reading of the text. I invite Dr. Chakraborty most cordially to this platform, but this time virtual, to discuss briefly some of the key ideas and arguments offered and analyzed, problems dealt with and deliberated. Dr. Chakraborty.
Okay, Anirban, thank you. First, I'd like to thank Sahapāthshālā for doing such a program. And I'm told, as you're saying, that it's an ongoing sort of process that you have, and we are part of that process. And I thank Sahapāthshālā, and good evening to all the viewers. So, Anirban, I have 20 minutes, around 20 minutes to speak. Is that right?
Yes. 20,
Okay.
25 minutes. Okay.
Okay, fine. So you just remind me if I am around that time, you just, let me know. Okay. So I'll sum
Sure.
up them. Okay. Thank you. So, so I'll just, in these 20 minutes, I can't, go deeper into various facets of the book. But I'll try to tell you what is at stake here. Why I wrote this book, and what is the central argument of the book. Now, one can say that although Anirban has said it is the forum is about philosophy, I'm mostly writing from the point of view of a teacher of English literature or literature. So philosophy is incidental here, but so to that from that point of view, I would think that this book is predicated on a confusion about between art's autonomy, the idea that art is an autonomical subject, that it is removed from life, it has an autonomy, and the idea of heteronomy in art, that is, art and life sort of blurs at times. So this confusion is at the heart of this book, and I try to use this confusion productively. Now, or to put in a more accessible terms, one could say that this book is about how to get a hang of the world, and how to get a sense of what literature does to us. So, one of the protagonists of the book is, of course, the American savant and critic and novelist George Santayana, philosopher. The other is Cavell. Cavell, many of you will assume that you know much better than Santayana. Santayana used to be in vogue many years ago, but now he's not so much. So, Santayana, in the chapters on Santayana, I fundamentally work on his classic work, which is called Skepticism and Animal Faith. Apart from his many, many critical works and his poetry and other stuff, but this book was central. And one of the very simple but powerful points that Santayana makes in this book is that often human beings in life and literature do not say, there it is. Like you point something and you don't say, there it is. You rather ask, what is that? So that is to say, we are bewildered by various things in life. And this bewilderment is at once a matter of confusion, but also a matter of hope, let us say. Now, how this is happening, so in this animal life book, he suggests, it's a big book, but he suggests that we are our living, this animal life, is about a flurry of mix and attentive kind of guesswork. So feeling, perception, comparison, synthesis, sometimes instrumental calculation, half understood cues, fantasy, anxiety, all these sort of make up how we move about in life. Okay. And we try to make sense of something which is essentially dynamic and which is essentially also fleeting. Right. So it is very futile to ask, questions like, why certain things logically move from one place A to B, although we can sometimes logically work with it. But so if we do that, if we look for, grand or unifying explanation of things, we gradually move to certain kind of custom or dogma. And in that book, Santayana sort of systematically argues against skepticism, chapter after chapter. And then various kinds of skepticism, and taking from certain other older philosophers. And then he takes, for example, he takes a few philosophical dogmas like the idea of certainty of religion or morality or stories as facts or romantic solipsism. These are all various kinds of dogmas which he Kolan, can you not hear me? Hello, am I audible? Okay, Susan, you can hear me, but okay, sure up, thank you. Okay, I'll continue. So
you are audible, Prasanta.
Okay, thank you. So he also takes apart from these points that I just now mentioned, also politically in many of his writings. He is horrified to see the cult of nationalism during that time, late 19th century, which has become omnivorous, all-pervading kind of passion, but also simultaneously liberalism, which is, instead of fulfilling the promise of liberty and equity, begins to at times advocate control. And this votaries of progress measure living by quantity rather than by finesse, nuance, and democratic sort of reaching out. Okay, so all these things are behind the way he works in this particular book that I'm mentioning. So he rather thinks that we have something called animal intelligence. This is somewhat like a sportsperson's intelligence, and we can understand, what is flux, what are the kind of intensities of life, how things flow, and then we gradually take note of things, talk of things, and behave the way we do in life. Okay. And he says, there are, of course, often even keel in which life flows, and then there are eruptions of intense moments. It could be joy, it could be pain, it could be various kinds of incidents in our life, which he calls sentimental time. Now the sentimental times are very important for literature. He says that we sort of weave, a good novelist or other forms of writers will use certain kind of, will arrest the flow of time and work with this animal intelligence and work with our condition, and there will be various permutations and combinations by which he will work. Now, so he goes on and talks about how illusions are substantial, how we have richer variety of life through this, how we can imagine and record lives in this manner. Basically, he's talking about the polyphony of parole and events in our life. Okay, and what happens in this approach? What is the advantage of this approach? Is that he accepts certain conjectures, instincts, and ignorance, that we are fundamentally vulnerable and ignorant about the things that we do. And therefore, there's a possibility that one can move into certain projections or fictions through which we can pass our life in a certain far more enlightened and intuitive manner. Okay, so this is, so this is largely the framework of this book that I'm talking about, Santayana's book, Skepticism and Animal Faith. And this philosophy, of course, he has several stages in his life, but I particularly took this particular book and some of his other writings, later writings, from where he actually, a mature way of looking into how literature works. He works on that we are startled by various things in life, and we can foreshadow certain happenings because we are startled. Okay, there are some prophetic pre-adaptation of animal instinct through which we can work. Okay, now Stanley Cavell, as you know, He's a very different kind of person. Santayana, by the way, is a Spanish savant who comes to America in Harvard, stays for a while, does not like New England because of its Puritan zeal and so on. I'll come to that. And then goes back much of his life, retires very early, goes back to Spain and lives like a, as a recluse most of his life, away from academia. On the other hand, Stanley Cavell spent all of his life again in Harvard later on, but he stayed along academia. But the relationship that I found interesting, although they are very different kind of people otherwise, is that Cavell also has this deep skepticism about, particularly coming from Wittgenstein and others, and he thinks that because we cannot communicate with each other, fundamentally we are unable to communicate with each other. We die small deaths every day. We are small deaths, humiliations, slights, stuttered hesitations, studied reductions of gratitude that kill intimacy, that maim social existence. So he's always worried about this skeptical doubt about how we can communicate, right? And from there, again, in a different way, he also gets into this idea of how can we, if we are so worried about our communicative skill, if you're so worried about the two human beings cannot have a relationship which is based on certain kind of communicability, which both the sides understand, then we are disappointed, of course. But this disappointment is also something from which we are bewildered and astonished, and we can convert this disappointment into something which is very realistic and very grounded. Now, this is very interesting, this shift, that whenever we see that certain things, the way we made calculations do not work and the projections do not work, we may sometimes end by laughing at our pride or be astonished by the life's twists and turns and so on. But also we can convert it into the serious doubt into some form of joy or intensity again, which is the matter of art and literature and films, particularly, as all of you know, his great interest in films. I'll come to that. So basically, I'm just giving this background to tell you why then I move into attention and drift. Now, I found that, if these two people in two different ways actually have great skeptical doubt about how life works, but also has serious investment in literature and what art does, what is their mode of working together, and how they can come out of this abyss and this skepticism and sort of celebrate life. And now this celebration of life is happening in Santayana in a much more darker way, I think, and Cavell in a typically American way, if you like, with much more optimism. But nevertheless, attention in this book, by the way, just if I may be allowed 5 minutes, attention I use not as focus. Usually it is an idea that attention is focus and distraction is the opposite of that. That is the standard commonsensical idea. And attention, if I'm attentive, then I'll get something out of it. I'll get some fame or money or some grades or something, attention gives us those kind of things. It's some interest. But or when we say attention is a kind of command, like stand at attention, that is also not the kind of attention that we're talking about. But attention rather as something by which we immerse into something. And this much of the book is about this what I call this idea of the not the torchlight, but something, a lantern that opens up in front of you, and gradually you, from one vignette to another, you open up to something by being attentive to that person. So I am indebted to the works of Simone Weil and Paul Ricoeur and others to think about in these terms, and then how attention sort of takes us into a zone of magnetic indetermination through which some orientation changes. A certain orientation, the way we look at the world, we'll look at our friend, look at books that we read, look at our neighbor, how our look at my lover, how this the orientation might change, right? And that each relationship then becomes very different. Okay. Now, along with that, I also bring the question of in this book the idea of drift. Drift is very important, like, because unless you wander, this idea of drift also means in this book much to do with insinuations, digressions, fumbling, inflections, clairvoyance, if you like. All these fantastic things, these wrong turns that we make in life are very important, so that also they buffer our attentive spirit. I just mentioned Simone Weil, who I really many of my friends know how indebted I am to her, but she's so serious about things, and I'm attracted by her seriousness in life and her focus about things, but at the same time there is something in literature which also demands lightheartedness, which is where the question of drift comes, our unfocus comes, and so therefore I connected these two. The whole book, this phrase have come again and again, attentive drift. Otherwise, these two terms do not usually come together. They are opposites, but I try to bring these two together. That drift is not inattention. Drift is more to do with something which is opposite to our being busy. Santayana, by the way, has a fantastic book, novel, has written in 1935, called The Last Puritan, and where he has this very interesting category which will be useful for us. Now we use the term woke and so on. There's a term he used, Puritan liberal. How can a Puritan be also a liberal? It's a very oxymoronic term. There's this main character called Oliver, who is everything the opposite of attentive drifter. He's very focused, very disciplined sufferer. He's a disciplined kind of sufferer, and every scrap of animal faith, makes him troubled. So he's running away from the glow and warmth of animal faith. He disowns the throbbing forces of nature, the matters of erotic entanglement, friendship, sports, studies. I mean, he doesn't like all those things, but yet he's a great gentleman. He's a very nice person. He's a good person even, but he is a very boring person because he is not into life. So he just showed, through that, very interestingly, what is the necessity of animal faith in our life. Cavell, as we know, I'll just, I'll take 10. Anirban, do I have 10 minutes more? Anirban, are you around?
Yes.
Okay,
Go
okay.
on. Please.
The rest of the 10 minutes, I'll talk a little bit about Cavell and then just make some concluding comments. So there are many things to talk about Cavell, and as I said, many of you are aware of his work from different fields, I would say. And that is something very interesting in him. In one of his essays in 1998 called The World as Things, Collecting Thoughts as on Collecting, he talks about how one collects various modalities. He turns his attention to his own act of collecting, what he means for texts or thoughts or words, how we put things together, why we put things together the way we do, how do we bring people into our lives, and how we sort of gradually move away from people in our lives, and what does literature do about all these things. So collecting is something very important, and from there I'm just beginning with this about Cavell, because from there gradually we see a very interesting way of coming to trying to come closer to people. We proximate to people with a constant sense that we cannot communicate with people. This is the conundrum. How can we communicate? Because we are at the edge of abyss. This fear that we will fail to communicate and will be lonely and so on. So from there, he actually takes as many of you are aware, his great writings on Shakespearean tragedies, I think, are fantastic on Lear and Othello and so on, where he gets into the idea of isolation and unknowability of our existence, the negative uniqueness that each one of us have, that art is a parable of separateness. And through that separateness, there's a process of self-discovery that happens. And we also realize this is also about self-deception, how we confront self-deception in the process. And through that, through this deep abyss, art sort of, through a certain guise, art also makes us attached to this world. So tragedy, through this hyperbolic complications and through these creaturely impulses, makes us outcast, makes us forgotten, makes us slaves in this world. And through that we take responsibility about ourselves by relying upon the world's verdict about us. So this is his, very interesting interest in tragedy, and but there's a positive side to it if it is too bleak. And I said, actually Cavell is far more optimistic than Santayana, but Cavell's interest in movies, all of you know about his interest in movies, and I get into that in the way through attention and drift, which is the trope that I work with. As I said, how he's interested in this, again, succession of sentimental time in movies, that how celluloid and camera and screen mechanically sort of gives us a sense of the joy de vivre of life. And artists, for example, they are stars, they defeat our self defeats. He says artists reveal to us through their involvement to our joys and longings and victories, and gives us enchantment which is worth living. And also about movies, he says that this that the whole idea of going to movies is about going to movies, like it's not viewing movies. For him, there's experiencing the movie theater. Particularly, he talks about the older Hollywood before European movies came into being. How he, during his college days, he would this a composite experience of going to the movie rather than watching a movie. It's not an exclusive business. You drift in the cinema hall with many other people whom you don't know, and you spend an evening in that unknowability in that hall, and there you have this very illicit pleasure, serendipitous joy of companionship with others. Also, you sit in silence, and many of those movies are actually silent movies of that time. And he has many other things about movies too, about something called automatism, about which I talk in the book. So he has these types, like the noir and the long takes, the mall, the gangster. These are the prototypes through which he works. But fundamentally, it's about a certain idea of attention, which is about silence and companionship, but also fun. A lot of what he calls attunement. In fact, Cavell has a term which I really like. He calls this adolescence that we are. Which adolescence is a time when we choose and discover at the same time. This is interesting to me, how we can simultaneously choose something and also discover something. Like, this is the attentive drift moment for me. Simultaneously, there are certain things which beckon us and we give in to that. And that is what literature also, that literature makes us lucid in this manner, through this idea of attentive drift. Now, this attentive drift cannot come immediately. There's a detour through this doubt, through this skepticism, eventually we come back to life. And that is what literature sort of celebrates. This is the fundamentally, largely, this is the framework with which the book works. Now, I'll just end by saying that if you then ask, still, what is the book doing? What is this after all? I've not talked about any professional English literature, criticism, where things are going and so on from that perspective. But having said this, I would say that, and I thought about it, why did I write this book? I've already given you that framework, I guess, but still, if you look at aesthetic, this is fundamentally a book on aesthetics. So if you ask a question about ethics or politics, I would respond, but I must emphasize that this is, and when I say aesthetic, it is not about taste, it is not about disinterest, it is not about value, it is not about judgment, it is not about objects, which are all these things usually we talk about aesthetics. It is also not about experience in the first person sense, but one can say the book is about a certain kind of attitude, aesthetic attitude. Now, this attitude, which allows us a glimpse into the essence of things through particular activities, and also gives us a sense of this fleetingness of the world, is very important, allows us to become lighter and also much more attentive simultaneously. So George Dickey, American aesthetic philosopher, in 1964 actually argued against this aesthetic attitude, and he said, these people who talk about attention in this manner, this attitude, they are actually inattentive. Now, I wanted to take inattention very seriously and bring drift into the picture, therefore, that it is not disinterest that I'm interested in. It's not psychical distance that I'm interested in, but how inattention is part of attention. We have to lose certain focus to bring back here. So that is one aspect which I think is at the back of my mind when I wrote this book. Also now, these days I've been reading, and many of you have been reading, the idea of cognitive poetics, which is where you immerse within text with script and schema. And it is the cognitive poetics examines how the conceptual base of metaphors interact with the text as a whole. It's not about new criticism, but something else. Also, I will just end by saying that there is something about relationality in all of this. That is to say, it's art as a situation. Let us say, if we consider art as a situation, using art as a means for recreating new relations among people through literature, and that we are all co-creators in a way, and that is where attention and drift comes in. And by co-creating, we dematerialize any project that we may have into a kind of process, an open-ended process. So, and then in this relationship, it's full of absurdity, eccentricity, sheer pleasure, also great tragic possibilities, etc. So that is largely the framework within which I have written this book. Let me stop here, and then Sanil and Kollan can take over. Yes, Anirban, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Prasanta. Much thanks for your deliberations, precise and insightful, incisive deliberations. So we will now move on to the first discussion, and Professor Sanil V, Professor of Philosophy at the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, Indian Institute of Technology, New Delhi. He was the Wharton Distinguished Professor of the University of Hawaii, USA, in 2010, as well as Charles Wallace Fellow at the University of Liverpool. His areas of interest is Asian philosophy, political and legal philosophy. So I welcome and invite Professor Sanil V to the discussion. Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Hi, Anirban, Prashanto, and friends. In fact, I was in the years ago, I joined a Zen meditation class. And, we are supposed to focus and attentive and all that. But I just couldn't. I was totally disturbed, but everybody else around got into trance in no time. So finally, I told the master that I can't focus. So he asked me, what are the things, on which you can really focus? So I said, look, one thing is that when I read something interestingly, or when I am talking to a friend who is interesting. So in fact, reading Prashanto's work and talking to him actually are instances of attentiveness and for me. I'm just telling my way into this book. The famous Hungarian Hegelian Marxist Alexander Koyave, he was asked after the Second World War about what is the future of human civilization. He said, look, there are three civilizations now. One is the Protestant civilization of work, America, England, Germany. The other one is the Slavic civilization of life and intensity, Russia, etc. And the third one is the civilization of siesta, the Mediterranean societies, where Santayana comes from. So for me, the what this book is about is a future civilization of siesta. And you don't go into siesta so that you can come back with renewed energy. But at the peak of the day, you should be able to lie down and switch off a bit. I think what is this possible? In fact, Santayana in the Animal Faith book, he says that when you read a book, you will have a smile on your face. I am going to explore the philosophical presuppositions of that smile. And I think one thing which this book is telling us, that as Prashanto said, that attention doesn't mean really focusing. I remember, the Kerala has the Sanskrit theater called Kudiyatam. And in Kudiyatam, one act of a play might take 42 days, 42 nights. So, that is a time where you can't really focus on it. You get bored and you will sleep a bit, you will be distracted a bit. But today, these performances are compressed into 3 hours. So one of the performers once told us that, look, there is no downtime for a performer today because everybody is focusing on every minute moment. But that's not the attentiveness under which that art form happens only if there is distraction, boredom, people sleep, etc. This is about classical art. I think this book for me is, that aesthetics is trying to tell me something about this, and we are living in a time when we have ADHD on the one side, attention deficiency, and hyper attention on the other side. So my own sort of entry is, into this question of attention is from cognitive science. I had requested Anirban, will you be able to show that picture? It's okay if it cannot, if there is an issue.
Yes, yes, yes.
If there's a difficulty, we can skip it. It's okay. Okay, I will. I just want to say how this Prashanta talked about cognitive poetics, how cognitive. Oh, I think it has come. Oh, no.
Can
Okay,
you see this?
let's keep it. It's not unnecessary. Yeah, I was just trying to say, suppose if you're reading a theology book about God, and suddenly, due to spelling mistake, there is a word dog there. So, what is your response? One response is to say that, look, it's a theology book. I know the overall wholeness. So, I will actually correct the word dog into God and I will read it. Another one is to say that, no, what actually mine is a bottom up approach. I will go there. I actually will see the word dog. And then I realize that it is a theology text and I correct myself. The first one is a top down. The other one is a bottom up approach. So cognitive psychology, there is this big debate about is our cognition bottom up or top down. Now, I think what this book or many other interesting philosophers have given the idea that, look, why do you have to make up our mind, whether we are top down or bottom up? It all presupposes that there is one threshold for cognition. That is, a lot of sensations are coming in, hitting my retina. One moment, my mind's eye will become focused on some, click it. And that clicked image, I will keep it in my mind. And when it weakens, it becomes memory. So you have perception first, memory second. Right? But the one option is that, look, there is no such one threshold which will decide whether what is past and present, what is before and after, what is perception and memory. What we have are multiple drafts, right? And attention is, as Prashanto describes it for me, is something which get immersed into these multiple drafts without assuming that there is one single, threshold. So, in fact, he discusses, Santayana, the Cavell and Simone Weil, who are all, my favorite thinkers. And Simone Weil sometimes says, she says that attention doesn't mean leaning in. That's what we often do. When we listen to something, we lean in. She says, you just have to stay back. That is what attention is. And what do you see when you stay back? This is the most brutal thing. She said, you can see the beauty of suffering, right? That's the risk. You can actually see the beauty of, suffering. And then, oh, this is the, see, this is a very typical trick of cognitive psychologists. Look, this, if you read down, it is ABC. And if you read to the side, it is 12, 13, 14. So that central figure, how do you read, depends on a top-down model. That is in the context that you realize. Can we just see the next one? Can you see anything there? Can anybody respond? It's the wall. Do you see anything there?
Too small for me. Yeah.
Pigeon, probably.
Actually, there is a cigar which is stuck to that wall. In between the stones, if you really look, you might be able to see a cigar. But you will not see it if you look for it. You will have to sit back and let it come to you. Then you will see, instead of lips in between the bricks, you will have a cigar. And this is the, which says, look, it's a top down. It's a top down. You need to see that cigar only when it will be there. But the other one says you need to know the context in which you will perceive something. So these are the two mechanisms of our attention. So in fact, to coming back to Simone Weil, she says, look, when you stay back, what you do is you do decreation. That is, you have to be self-dispossessed. There's a negative effort about attention. That's what make it, there's a kind of undoing about. And that's most interesting thing this book is. So what is this self-disposition? What is that we should give up? And what we should give up is not this Cartesian self, but human finitude is that we need to give up. What is human finitude? Human finitude is the idea that we can never know the world directly. We can only know the world in terms of my relationship with the world, in terms of culture, in terms of my body, in terms of history. So we can never have an access to life, right? Direct access to life. I think what Prashanto's book is telling me is that we'll have to give up this attitude of finitude. That's a being who relates to the world in terms of his entrapment, his limitations, etc. And we have a direct access to the world. And, Stanley Cavell, actually, when he says about, look, we are all, that is skepticism. That's one predicament of human thinking. How do you overcome skepticism? There are two typical ways of overcoming skepticism. One is an epistemological humility. We say that, look, our knowledge is always limited, reality is too big, there is too much to know. So there is a kind of epistemological humility. Another one is an ontological shyness. We say that, look, reality is not what it is. It's all the time changing. It is becoming, that is, you will never can hold reality in your hand because it's not itself. So you'll always be shy, right? Whatever you catch in your hand is not what it is. So you are shy. So this epistemological humility and ontological shyness, and, Stanley Cavell says, look, what we call attention demands, you have to give up these two. That's the solution to human skepticism, right? And we are capable of, doing this. And in fact, Prashanto takes this very interesting two concepts to explain this. One is adolescence and the other is automatism. That is, attentiveness is a very adolescent attitude. So he says this, and I will call it as an amateur attitude, right? This adolescent curiosity. He says a bewildered and expectant view of the world. The openness to new, openness to something which is contingent. It is a truth before assertion, right? So this is this attitude of, adolescence. And the other one is automatism, which I think is a very, very interesting idea. I remember years ago when I went abroad, I saw this board for a South Asian Center for Rote Learning, right? And this is this idea about, automatism. And when you go to a meditation class, they will ask you to focus on your breath. And that's not to focus on your body. Breathing is an automatism which is part of your body, right? Attentiveness just man being related to automatism. And Cavell discovered that cinema is what it makes characteristic of cinema is automatism. One is automatism of the camera, right? Then there is automatism of images being, coming one after the other. Another one is automatism of genre, stars. Typical idea is that Bombay film, they always say we have a formula. It's a formula film. And we think that it's just commercial films which are formula. But the idea about formula is so internal to cinema, right? And that's the idea about automatism. And he says this automatism is actually a mystery, and automatism is a certain mark of praise or admiration. And I would say automatism is actually a prayer. Prayer is the most automatic thing. You can repeat it, Buddhist prayer wheels, etc. The prayer is a total, automatism. So this adolescent and automatism are very interesting, concepts which, connect them. And, so in this book, when you read it, you get this idea that attention means not leaning in, but sort of staying back. So what are we saying? There's a very modern sensitive kind of sensitivity that you shouldn't go and grasp what you want. You should just sit back and let the world come to you. Now, that's not what this book is really saying. And here, I have a couple of issues. I thought I just want to place it in front of you and Prashanto. Prashanto says attentiveness is the love of the world, right? Now, what about hate? Is not hate attentive, right? What is the modality specific to? Because hate is a emotion where you want to rebuild the world without the hated object. It's a very entity-directed, thing. And in another context, we discussed this. If Prashanto remember, in the I think in Bhagavata Puranam, the Jaya Vijayas, the custodians of heaven, Vaikuntham there was a curse on them that they will be born as human beings. So when they asked for Shava Moksha, Vishnu said, Brahma said, if you actually pray to Vishnu, you will take 9 lives to come back. But if you hate Vishnu, you will only take 3 months to come back, right? And they decided to hate Vishnu. And I don't go into the story, but just want to say that second birth was as Ravana, right? Ravana hated Ram. But he couldn't get Shava Moksha because his hatred for Rama was disturbed by his love for Sita. It was not pure hatred. Right? And it's only when he is born as Shishupala, he will actually, even before he gets language, he started abusing Krishna. So it is pure and attentive hatred. Right? So hatred has this internal life. Even after the hated object is destroyed, the hatred has a certain life. Right? So shouldn't we think about that kind of attentiveness, which is internal to hatred, as opening ours to the question about love? And another one issue which I wanted to point out was the automatism of cinema. And in India, we have a very nice statement for characterization of cinema as time pass, right? Which is the definition of entertainment. That is, when you watch cinema, we can time pass without it affecting us, right? That's what entertainment. Now, if you look at modern Kantian Western philosophy, time is the form of self-affection, right? There's a different relationship to time where, you can let the time pass without affecting us, right? And this is, for me, the radical critique of aesthetic attitude, right? Which is there in entertainment. And people like Agamben, develops it in that story about Kafka's the new attorney. There is this new attorney who doesn't go to the court, but he just endlessly sits in the library and, read. So this kind of endless pedagogy, right, as a kind of curiosity and attentiveness. And the third one, which I wanted to sort of, seek for discussion, is can we define attentiveness radically as the absence of work? Right? It's in the absence of work in the sense of Foucault said, the absence of work in both the madness and in literature, right? And not only the idea about text, but suspending both the idea about work. And, this Cavell discusses this, Wittgenstein's statement that we have philosophical problems because language goes on holiday. Now, what do we do? Cancel the holiday and call language back to do our work so that if you really attend to language, we won't get into this thing? No. Wittgenstein was saying that language is on holiday. Please send it on sabbatical, right? Don't let it come. Let it be on a permanent sabbatical, right? And that is the real challenge of getting out of finitude and all that. Just send language on a permanent sabbatical leave. And that's for me the absence of work. So can we think it in terms of this? Today I think our challenge for talking about this attention and drift will be because now this attention and drifts happen within the digital technology, right? And I think one person which maybe if there is a second part to this book is what I expect him is that we talk about Bernard Stiegler, right? And Stiegler talks about, this kind of, the first is the three type of memory we have. One is the primary memory. When I listen to music, I know that each note is, because Prashanto himself is a musician. So, each note is followed by another one, and we have a primary memory of relating to it. Then there's a secondary memory about hearing the same music again and again. And he says that the secondary, have a certain retroactive effect on the first one. And now we know that there's a tertiary memory, that all our memories are in digital issues, in digital media. Now the question is that how do you listen today with so much of digital? What is listening in a, digital world? And I think during the COVID, when we had online teaching, I realized that the students will listen to you only when you are allowed them to open up 3-4 other windows, right? Only under multitasking that the students can actually pay any attention to what you are doing. And it actually led to a big political program in, the group around Bernard Stiegler, where they asked for something like universal income. There is contributive economy. There are new kinds of video and players, where you can, like the book is allowing you to archive things. You should be able to archive our memory in a new thing, so that now attention is a commodity, like all the Amazon and Google and all are selling our attention as a product. Now, is there a way to free attention from this, economy where attention is quantified, and how do we achieve that in a politics of digital media? I just want to end by just saying that the other day, my students did a term paper in the class about the pain of doctors in Gaza who are actually conducting surgery without anesthesia. I thought that was a shocking realization of attentiveness for me, because anesthesia is what allows you to just totally switch off your attention outside. And how do they actually conduct, surgery without anesthesia? So what one doctor, well, actually they are amputating the leg of a small boy, and the doctor is closing the eyes. One doctor is shutting the eyes of the thing, now that he is not looking at it. And the doctors are doing it, and everybody around is chanting Quran, right? And it's some way that, everybody is focusing on this, pain in some way, and there is no way there is no, anesthetic available to us. And I think in a way, it also defines our situation, where we have to really talk about, attentiveness. So thank you, Prasanta, to just wander through the books.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you. Very, very insightful, incisive, critical reading of the text. Very interesting take of points. when you were talking about hatred, the politics of hatred as internal to attentiveness and the concept of time pass that is without affecting us. The concept of time is very important, and also your taking up of the question of memory. And I was reminded of when Hegel was talking about productive memory, Gedächtnis. So, and also you were mentioning Agamben's a notion of radical inapparativeness. So these are the things, and also the question of language coming up when this notion of attentiveness, radical inapparativeness, absence of work, time pass are being negotiated in terms of the notion of a language when which is a kind of sublated form when the internal chit chats of the body are not getting determined. So these are the things I were thinking of. So moving on to further discussion, we would look forward to listen to Professor Kalyan Kumar Das. He is an assistant professor of English at Presidency University. His research publications in journals like Critical Philosophy of Race and Economic and Political Weekly, Jewish Studies, and Contemporary Voice of Dalit. That actually covers his areas of interest like critical theory, continental philosophy, critical caste studies, and race studies. And his recent research focuses on Dalit sartorial politics and Dalit aesthetics. So, Dr. Kalyan Kumar Das.
Thank you, Anirban. Am I audible?
Yes, absolutely
Okay.
audible.
Um, Thank you, Anirban, for inviting me to participate in this book discussion on Prasanta Das' wonderful book. And I choose the word wonderful quite carefully. The book is all about encountering the wonderful, or to be wondering. Um, I'm going to very quickly focus on some of the dimensions, characteristics of the text that really touched me, forced me to pay attention to Prashanta's book, and then to drift into various other avenues, only to get back to Prashanta's book. And that went on for quite some time as I was trying to read the book. My initial experience of uh, leafing through this book was that of a bit of a bewilderment, an important word in the context of Prashanta's attention and drift. Um, I was a bit bewildered because I wasn't quite capable of figuring out. And again, the phrase figuring out is a very potent phrase in the context of the book. If you read the book, you will see that both Stanley Cavell and Santayana are engaged in the act of meaning making, figuring out. So when I was trying to figure out what the book suggests, I was a bit baffled. And all these words, this kind of a constellation of terms, bewilderment, baffled, wondering, wonderful, tell us a lot about the book. Now, as I said, for the paucity of time and for our logistical convenience, I'll try to restrict myself to some of the features that touched my heart as I was reading Prashanta's book. There are many things that really matter to me, and they have been explored in Prashanta's book quite nicely. Foremost among them is the question of familiarity and unfamiliarity. Prashanto, in the fag end of his brief description of the book, drew our attention quickly to the fact that this is a book about aesthetics and not so much about the political or politics. And I completely agree with the author himself on how he sees the book, how he presented the book. But the book also engages with the political in a different way. And that engagement with the political revolves around the question of familiarity and unfamiliarity. And it is through this focus on the political that a reader who is otherwise interested in political philosophy and Western philosophy can slowly navigate towards the pages of literature. So, indeed, it is a book that takes us back to literature. It is a journey from being to becoming. It is an invitation to its readers to be more attentive in a very affected manner, to be attentive to the otherwise boring ordinariness of life and how that itself can become defamiliarized through the pages of literature, because literature adds that dimension to the ordinariness of life. The habitual life suddenly is rendered as something that is phantasmagoric. So that is the trope through which I'm going to briefly talk about Prashanta's book. If you open the book, in the first segment of the book that focuses on Santayana, the book is divided into two parts, roughly. The first part focuses on Santayana and Santayana's notion of the animal faith. Time and again, Prashanto deploys this very interesting phrase, and I'm in love with that phrase, the leap of animal faith. So it's not just leap of faith, but a leap of animal faith. And the idea of animal faith is, of course, something that both Prashanto and Professor Sanil have briefly talked about, and it is there writ large on the first part of the book that focuses on Santayana's philosophy. And it is in that context that Santayana's anxieties about the American experience of nationalism and American obsession with liberal political thought uh, are these two things are underscored by Prashanto. Prashanto quickly draws our attention in the first part of the book to how Santayana was skeptical of American nationalist spirit and how Santayana was also quite impatient with the kind of liberalism that he was witnessing in the United States. And a little later, uh, I have the visual memory of reading that part of the book. I think it's on the left-hand side of the book that you come across these anxieties of Santayana about nationalism and liberalism. On the right-hand side, on the top part of that next page, you see how Santayana, somebody who was so exasperated with the American life, eventually retired to the Spanish life, to which he wholeheartedly belonged. He focuses on the idea of stillness, the idea of not rushing into things. Uh, so there is an engagement in Santayana with the otherwise boring everydayness, ordinariness of the quotidian life. And I'm going to put these two things together to thereafter engage with Cavell's philosophy. So when I was reading that part of Prashanto's book, engaging with Santayana's criticisms of American nationalism and anxieties about American liberal democratic experiments, I was taken back to Uday Mehta's book Liberalism and Empire, in which Mehta wonderfully summarizes how Edmund Burke, the great conservative thinker, had proposed a model, a tentative model of encountering the unfamiliar. When the colonizers encountered the would-be colonized countries, the non-Western societies, it was a completely unfamiliar terrain for them. So Locke, Bentham, Mill, the liberal philosophers proceeded along a path through which they tried to familiarize the unfamiliar. That is the realm of the political that Santayana is impatient with. And that is the realm of the political which is dominated by, determined by liberal political thought. And that has constituted a large part of our political common sense in the modern political world, is something that Prashanto is also impatient with, in my opinion. opinion as far as this book goes, and proposes somewhat like that Barkian proposition that we must let the unfamiliar remain unfamiliar, yet an intimate one. And that leads us into the domain of uh, epistemological skepticism. At the same time, the way we can make ourselves vulnerable in love. Prashanta's book is not only a return or a turn to literature, to aesthetics from the political of the liberal kind, but it is also an invitation for us to be alert to the experiences of love. If you focus on the second part of the book, which is engaging with Stanley Cavell's work, and I have been personally quite in love with Cavell's work, essays like Must We Mean What We Say, that focuses on human communication. Cavell, of course, focuses on the idea of the impossibility of communication. There is a great deal of skepticism there. But Stanley Cavell's work is important, and in some sense, it anticipates some of the things that Jacques Derrida will talk about later on. I think Cavell's work talks about an ethical responsibility to communicate with the other, the unfamiliar other. So, Cavell, for instance, in one of his writings, talks about the failure of knowledge as a failure of acknowledgement. And Prashanto quotes that part, and I want to read that part out. I have earmarked that part from Prashanto's book because that is really important. The failure of knowledge is the failure of acknowledgement, which means whatever else it means, that the result of the failure is not an ignorance, but an ignoring, not an opposable doubt, but an unappeasable denial, a willful uncertainty that constitutes an annihilation. So, of course, Cavell is drawing our attention to contingency. And I'm reminded of my own engagement with Charles Sanders Peirce's focus on the American pragmaticist philosophers' engagement with the idea of fallibilism, the idea of critiquing the Cartesian epistemological skepticism, where in many ways pragmatist philosophy engages with something like Hans-Georg Gadamer's comment on how enlightenment is prejudiced against prejudice. So I understand that this is an invitation, if you follow Cavell's words, and if you follow how Prashanto is extrapolating these words from Cavell's work, it is an invitation for all of us to not only recognize the magnificent aura, the wonderment, the kind of bewilderment, the sense of bishoy, to use that Bangla word, that literature typically renders to our ordinary quotidian lives. But also it is an invitation to recognize the contingencies of life, how human beings are determined by this inescapable finitude of life, how we are all fallibilistic creatures. Now, if we are fallibilistic creatures, if we are marked by contingencies of life, uncertainties of life, how do we encounter the other? A political problem for the liberal political thinkers, but it is also a question that a lover typically asks. Two lovers become intimate by trying to know each other. But knowing, as Prashanto invites us in this book, is a problematic trope. It is a murky terrain because knowing has no end. It is as if you are focused on knowing, you miss out on the various dimensions of our everyday life, the ordinariness of our everyday life, the otherwise boring part of our life. So it's a kind of, my friend Joydeep Datta would be a better person to talk about boredom. I'm not a person who engages with the philosophical contours of the idea of boredom. But I think boredom is something that really helps us understand how we can engage with these questions of uncertainty, contingency, fallibilism, bewilderment, etc. So the part that focuses on Cavell's work in Prashanta's book, it also engages with Shakespearean tragedies. And I'm somewhat disappointed with Prashanta for not adequately focusing on, in his brief presentation on his book today, on the idea of Cavell's, on the various postulations that Cavell offers on Shakespearean tragedy. And I really enjoyed reading that part of the book as much as I enjoyed the first part of the book, which focuses on animal faith and the leap of animal faith that I have already mentioned. In this part of the book, following Cavell's work on Shakespearean tragedy, Prashanta draws our attention to one of the most magnificent of Shakespearean tragedies, Othello. Othello is suspicious of Desdemona, Desdemona's sexual, romantic, emotional fidelity. He is continuously in this kind of a dilemma. He is in love with Desdemona, he cannot trust Desdemona. And Iago's machinations have already instilled a great sense of suspicion in his mind, some kind of a skepticism. And the tragedy is, if we have to follow Prashanta, and if I have understood Prashanta's argumentative arc carefully and rightly to some extent, I think Prashanta, following Cavell, reminds us of how Othello's premise is problematic, not so much because he doesn't love Desdemona, doesn't trust Desdemona, as it were. But Othello's premise is problematic because Othello wants to know. Othello wants to know for sure whether Desdemona is dedicated to him. Instead of letting himself be vulnerable in love, instead of letting the contingencies of love and life help him navigate that terrain that otherwise seems to be so tragically unlivable. In Shakespeare's Winter's Tale, The Winter's Tale, which is not a tragedy, it's a tragicomedy, and the first part of the text, The Winter's Tale, I think it was Leontes who realizes at the pivotal part of the play in Shakespeare's The Winter's Tale that he has always been haunted by suspicion of some kind of a skeptical mind. And it is this skeptical mind that has pushed him into all sorts of tragic consequences. And that's the pivot through which the tragic dimension of the text turns into a more comic dimension of life. Slowly, the Winter's Tale, and there's a huge focus on the idea of the tale in the Winter's Tale, and Prashanta has drawn our attention to it as well. It invites us to be attentive and to drift into the uncertainties of life and love. Now, I want to quickly draw your attention to some of these words and phrases and sentences that I'm already in love with, and that these are scattered across Prashanta's book. But I'm going to focus on this section of the book that talks about Cavell's work on Shakespeare's tragedies, on Shylock, on Othello, on Leontes, and so on. In this part of the book, he talks about, for instance, there's this wonderful phrase, shunning intimacy, we prefer to live in the familiar. It is not so much in making the unfamiliar partner more and more familiar through a knowledge trope, but to let the unfamiliarity of that person, or rather the familiar unfamiliar, the unfamiliar familiar in the other, in that person, that intimate other, is the key that Prashanta wants us to recognize. And he follows this line is followed by another interesting line. In life and love, we believe what we disbelieve, as Montaigne had said. We turn double in ourselves, and that is the reason we can neither absorb nor reject intimacy. And therefore must implore that the world may tear apart. Radical doubt and finitude are the phrases there. while Leontis's first part in the Winter's Tale, Leontis is dominated by nothing but suspicion. Othello is dominated by nothing but suspicion. That kind of epistemological skepticism, trying to know what the partner is doing incessantly, infinitely, that leads them into tragedy. Prasanta says that this is what he calls the universality of tragedy. In its universality, tragedy denies our finitude. So, in a sense, it is an invitation. Cavell's reading of Shakespearean tragedies, Prasanta's invitation to turn to literature, to turn to aesthetics, is not necessarily a negation of the political as such. Rather, it is an invitation to think of how contingencies determine our life, love, as well as the political. What we understand, what I think Prashanta is not, Prashanta is wary of, Prashanta is not patient with, and rightly so, is this liberal political that we have been so dominated by for such a long period of time. So it is a different kind of Burkean conservatism that I see, that I discern in Prashanta's book, and that really touched my heart. I want to also very quickly focus on some other sentences and phrases. For instance, he says saying becomes more important than meaning. So when Cavell was talking about in his own somewhat, skeptical mind, he was talking about how human communication is almost an impossibility. Cavell does not propose that two lovers do not try to communicate with each other. They do. They have to. They must. They will utterly fail. It will always be an incomplete and impossible and contingent kind of communication. But it is in these moments of, uh, failure that you find love. Right? So that invitation to the unknowable, that invitation to the uncertain and the contingent is the crux of the book. And it is in this sense that Prashanta's book takes us away from the world of political certitude into the muddied terrain of life, of love, and literature. It is a turn away from philosophy and an invitation, at least at a speculative level, an invitation to think of the philosophical world transforming itself into the world of literature. I think that captures the soul of the book, in my opinion, and this is how we must be able to appreciate Prashanta's contribution. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kullan. Very interesting, an insightful reading of the book. Yes, the moments of failure and invitation to the unknowable. This is actually the crux that is moving through the course of the book, and the question of knowledge is is unsettled with the uh, co-constitutiveness of the sense of notion of unknowability, the sense of fullness of meaning, and knowledge is constantly ungrounded. So that carries the idea of the impossibility of knowledge, and also the contingencies of things. And of course, when we are thinking of automatism, we're also thinking of the moments of 2K, something coming up unexpectedly. These are the moments that we are actually waiting for. So, so the discussion, after discussion and presentation by Dr. Chakravarty, the floor is open to questions, comments, deliberations, or ideas. Yes, anyone, yes.
Yes, I wanted to ask something. I mean, I'll just read out something that I was writing as Prashanto was. Can you hear me? Am I audible? Right.
Yes.
Okay, cool. So so I'll just quickly read.
Please put your video on.
Sorry.
Are there?
You go ahead, Manas. You go ahead.
Yes.
So as Prashanto was speaking, and even Sanil and Kalyan, I was just elaborating on this point that I wanted to make and ask Prashanto about. So as he said in the beginning, that the more we communicate, the more we fail to do so. So that's something on which I paid attention to, and it relates to the question, as has been said by everybody who spoke. To the question of unfamiliarity and unknowability in intimacy in the book. So there's a question to begin with, which I'm asking, is that is it a problem of language or of intersubjectivity? Or is it something else, because intersubjectivity or receptivity also includes the element of silence? So are we also talking about silence here? Because what is a failure, or what can be regarded as a failure in terms of objective understanding, resides in the intuitive, but also in a kind of impossibility. So where the question of silence comes in. So people have talked about love, Sunil talked about hatred, and I would like to bring in through this very small illustration, where I won't be really asking a question, but leaving Prashanto to comment on what I will just read out. I want to bring in the element of suicide. I was actually thinking about Abbas Kiarostami's film Taste of the Cherry, and where this middle-aged man, Badi, played by Humayun Irshadi, who passed away, as we know, on 11th November. And you know how that character is intensely focused on finding a man who could collaborate with his committing suicide. Now, most of the film is about Badi's silence and the deepening mystery of why he wants to commit suicide. The three characters that he tries to persuade to help him, the young Kurdish soldier, the Afghan soldier, and also the elderly Azerbaijani taxidermist. But they are the ones, these three people are the ones we hear more in the film, you know, and we hear less of Badi. And these guys are telling Badi why they find it difficult to help him. And they're also trying to dissuade him from his intended act. But Badi's silence is also meaningful and revealing, because we suspect that Badi realizes it is not a good idea for him to tell the others why he wants to commit suicide. Now, he does not take the conversation by remaining silent or by not speaking much. He kind of, does not take the conversation between him and the others into a realm of reason. That's what I'm trying to argue. So he wants somebody to empathize with his desire without any knowledge of where it is coming from. So is it that we want the world to help us without knowing us, but by paying attention to our problem, our silence, and our incommunicable self? The world cannot save Badi. It can only help him ease his suffering. So our attention to the world is perhaps based on an unreciprocable, elusive promise. I'll end there. Thank you.
Manush, is it a comment, or it's very interesting, or do you want me to respond to this?
No, just feel free. I just, was writing down these thoughts coming spontaneously as you were talking. So I leave you if you feel like saying it. So that's
no, I just thought, I mean, that's a fantastic example of how all that I wanted to say in a different way, that how a different kind of communication can happen without, and Sanil also talked about outside of language, what are the possibilities, and where now, and one of the points that I wanted to just think about, that one of the problems with communication is our worry, and I think Santayana talks a lot about it, that will be rebuffed by our interlocutors. So therefore, we have another kind of silence of not even attempting to communicate by the fear of being misunderstood. Now that has to be, I mean, I'm thinking of the film, that if Vadi had that issue that he will never be able to communicate with anyone, and he will be in that abyss of doubt, there's no possibility of moving a step forward. Now, that first part of radical doubt, I think is something very seriously one has to take that, and then move on to what you said. That is the detour I was talking about, and you are aware, and some of people here are aware that, and this also takes me to Sanil's point about um, how one should take hatred seriously. And Anirban has, by the way, written, some of you know, a book on Hingsha and Mahabharata about violence and so on. Now, as some of you know, I have a serious interest, and I think Sanil is a gentle person. He did not sort of rebuke me, but I think he'll be slightly disappointed by this book because of its optimism. This particular book that I've written, whereas my earlier books takes much more seriously the questions of violence and the in communication, discommunication. But anyway, I'm drifting here. Coming back to Manash's point, I agree. That's a fantastic example of how one can cross our doubts and our diffidence and hesitation into something else. Thank you for the example.
Thanks, Prashanto.
I mean, if I may be, is there any other question, please? Yeah, go ahead. Kullan, are you here? Swastik, you have a question? Swastik, please go ahead.
Hello, sir. It's not quite a question, but it's my personal experience because recently I was reading Voltaire's Candide, and here I came across with the character Pangloss, the philosopher Pangloss. So the optimism in this book, I was just discovering pages by pages. So the Pangloss logic and a word you have used it in the introduction, it is the attentive drifter. So I was thinking Pangloss in that sense of attentive drifter. He was at a certain time very optimistic, but he was also have that much of diastrophic logic because in the chapter 5 in Candide, I was reading that Pangloss was sinking. There was a shipwreck and he was not saving himself, but he was showing a way to the seamen that this is the way of Lisbon. He was not saving himself. So in that case, I was just trying to relate. It is the attentive drifter where we have a self-revelation, not to save ourselves, but to give the proper way to the others. Just a little point.
Thank you, Swastik. Yeah, yeah, of course, Pangloss, who doesn't know? I mean, but as you know, Voltaire also critiqued that idea of hope without sustained sort of immersion in the kind of thing that Sanil was suggesting, I think. So therefore, and especially in a time where we see glee all around, we see in a time of acute tragedy and absolute miscommunication. I mean, this book is not directly about our times. I didn't want to make it relevant in that sense, but relevant in that in a more journalistic sense. But your point about this worry that I have, and I think I share that with Sanil and others about in public sphere, this optimism of Panglossian optimism. Actually, I have a song on that also. That how one can take that.
I heard actually.
Yeah.
I heard you.
Yeah. So therefore, this detour, I think, is something very important to me. And also about the question of politics. I think Kullan is not here, but I was thinking also connected with because you mentioned Voltaire, his rationalism and so on. And I think politics in terms of which is a kind of an encounter where a certain form and event sort of comes together and initiative is taken. That was something that I worked in the Machiavelli book, where you have encounters and collisions, and that encounters are important. This attention and this encounter with the world is another kind of sort of political issue. But Kollan is talking about the point about liberalism and how one sort of takes that problem. Anyway, any other comments, Swastik? I hope I responded to your point. Saurabh, you have a question?
Yes, sir. I have a question. Thank you for this book launch. Kind of, you have talked about your book. At the beginning of today's session, you actually talked about the animal intelligence, and I was not being able to find out what this animal intelligence you actually mean too. So I just wanna know that what is animal intelligence according what you have written in your book, or what do you
Okay,
think about?
okay. It's a complicated concept, but in Santayana, but I'll just give you two words for it. One is a certain kind of watchfulness. Now, by watchfulness, I don't animals are watchful about what's happening around you. We should be, but that watchfulness is not about being skeptical and doubtful about everything else, but that it is about a certain kind of diffidence and humility. So watchfulness is a kind of attention, let us say, and diffidence and humility is about some kind of digression and recess that we take. So this simultaneously, animal faith is about a certain kind of taking cognizance. Therefore I mentioned a sports person has that kind of an approach, how to, especially if you're playing a team game, around you, if you have played say football, you have to have a sense of watchfulness. You have to have a peripheral vision around you, and that gives a sense of who is where and what are the moves that you're going to make. Now that could be one side of it. The other side of it is a certain kind of letting go of yourself when the time comes and get into the intensity and so on. That is roughly, I would say, what is animal faith. But of course then there are many contours and many tributaries to this idea. Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Any other question, or is Kollan or Sanil, you want to say something? Because I'm just going on and on.
Prashanto, I was thinking of how very briefly there is an engagement with the idea of social contract theory. In the part where you are engaging with Cavell's work, in the second part of the book, you briefly talk about, I can just, go to that page and read it out for your convenience. But I think there is a part that for me was a bit confusing
Okay.
because I am interested in that paradigm from where we can travel from the political and the philosophical to the literary. Hmm. So that's why I'm taking you back to that problematic dimension of the political. Somehow,
Yeah.
in your rendition of Cavell's, summarizing of Cavell's postulations on the idea of consent to govern ourselves through the body of the state, I was reminded of Locke's and Rousseau's ideas of social contract theory. And apparently, I'm sure Cavell probably doesn't say that, and you probably do not suggest it. But from the look of it, from the superficial reading of that part in your book that focuses on Cavell's engagement with the idea of contract and consent, etc., I think there is a bit of a confusion as to whether Cavell
I,
upholds social contract theory in his own way, or does he negate that? Does he contest it? If he if he contests it, how?
okay. Okay. Sorry, Shashid, you had something to say. Shashid's here. Sh- Professor Shashid Hegde is here. Did I hear you say something? Okay, so I'll come back. So Kalyan, you were you were not here for a minute or so. I was talking about my understanding of politics, although I directly don't mention that, as you rightly say. So, three things I think both Cavell and Santayana have kept aside, away from in different ways. One is contract, like, the fundamental idea of social contract is something that they are not interested in, and they see there's a problem with that. The other is decisionism, which we know is a particular idea of taking immediate decision about certain things, which has a certain authoritarian aspect to it. And the third is absolute deferral, like, deferral of any encounter perennially. So there I think there's early Derrida and Cavell has a difference, although late Derrida and Cavell may have some connections. So it's contract, decision taking immediately for political reasons, and deferral, the other side of decision. Decision is the obverse of deferral. These three they have avoided. So therefore, how am I thinking of politics? And I was referring to my interest in Machiavelli and others, is that that politics is more about a form and an event and a certain kind of initiative that one takes, where there's certain conjunctures come together, and we as actors in that conjunctures, we sort of take certain positions and where those events happen. So there is a kind of give and take between the conjectures and us as political actors, let us say. And attention, therefore, following what you said about your political point and the way I am thinking is the kind of involvement in something, and drift is a certain kind of impetuosity. Like, there's a kind of, it's not prudence, it's not wisdom through which you work, more through a kind of, what we call metis, through a way by which you give and take. And that is the kind of one, there's a shift from politics to literature that you're saying. That is, for me, politics is an art of poesis. That is to say, it is impresses upon matter certain things, and politics become possible, and a new creation happens through the encounter. This encounter is something where this, I was thinking, which can challenge or sort of challenge all the three things that I've said: contract, decisionism, and absolute deferral of encounter. Roughly, I was thinking of that, if you want to. So therefore, we, and it's
So
a response to your presentation.
if I may read out from your book, this is the paragraph that I was thinking of on page number 130, if you have the book in front of you.
Let me see. Yes, I do have, yeah.
So page number 130, what I consent to in consenting to the contract is not mere obedience, but membership in a polis, which implies two things. First, that I recognize the principle of consent itself, which means that I recognize others to have consented with me, and hence that I consent to political equality. Second, that I recognize the society and its government so constituted as mine, which means that I'm answerable not merely to it, but for it. So far, then, as I recognize myself to be exercising my responsibility for it, my obedience to it is obedience to my own laws. Citizenship in that case is the same as my autonomy. The police is the field within which I work out my personal identity, and it is the creation of political freedom.
Absolutely.
So I got a bit confused on this.
I understand. This is a critique. So you see, the next line after this says, our social bonds are betrayal of our contracts. If you just see the next line.
Right.
So once we, the paragraph that you just read is a kind of hard instinct by which we do this. And then we repeatedly betray this contract. So that therefore, if I have a contractual relationship, go ahead.
Sorry. So my initial comment on how this work of yours takes us away from the liberal political was in line with the way you are extrapolating this passage from Cavell's work, and you are in a qua Cavell, you are infusing it with a kind of energy which I identified as some kind of a conservatism, in a good sense, of course.
Right. In a way, Cavell starts with this in that Critique of Reason book, where he talks about this abyss, that this is how human beings function. Largely modern, human beings through certain kind of contractual evidence, which is precisely because I'll betray you, because I'm in a contractual relationship with you. You can take it for granted that I'll betray you sometime or the other. Okay. And therefore, some has to come with something else.
That's right.
Our encounter should be different.
Fantastic. I loved reading your book. I really loved it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Shashi, sorry, I could not read what you wrote. I'm sort of technologically slightly challenged, but sorry if you are making a point, Shashi. Well, we can read that later, maybe. Any other question,
Yeah.
or any?
can
Yes, Shashi, please go ahead.
No,
Yeah.
no. I think my mail. I mean, the message is incomplete, and I think it kind of moved before I could send it across. Now, I was thinking about this juxtaposing of Santayana and Cavell is, in a manner of speaking, trying to think about philosophy and literature in their mutuality, right? Now, if philosophy and literature have to be constituted in their mutuality, then how fair is it to read as Dr. Kalyan was suggesting, as a movement from philosophy into literature, right? So I was only saying that if mutuality between philosophy and literature is to be constituted, it cannot be constructed as a movement from to, right, etc. So I was only trying to react to that point.
Okay.
I was only trying to react to that point, which I had some. I mean, the suggestion of a movement from to,
Right.
in a manner of speaking, kind of
May not work.
seems to suggest something about the mutuality of philosophy and literature that is sought to be established being incomplete or something of that kind. So I
Okay.
was thinking that would the juxtaposing of Santayana and Cavell be read also as an attempt to think about philosophy and literature in their mutuality and not in terms of traversal from to?
Right. I agree with you, Shashi, that it is more about mutuality. And, one thing that initially attracted me about these two is that, this is coming from my discipline, English literature, where the idea of literary criticism is hotly debated often. And we had a phase of literary theory and so on. And now there's a lot of discussion what exactly literary critics should do. We say there's a post-critical time and so on. There are various things, and I was thinking in these two, if you look at what kind of professors they were in Harvard, you will see that it's very difficult to pigeonhole them into this or that category. Primarily, many of them are art critics and literary critics, but they're also philosophers, so we often bandy the term, interdisciplinary and so on. But for the timing, we keep that aside. We see that their positions, professorial positions, are more about doing philosophy or politics or whatever through literature. There's a criticism. So this literary approach, therefore I mentioned, slightly, hyperbolically, that this book is more about literature and aesthetics, not about politics and ethics. But of course, all those things are there. But what is this method? I mean, again, method is possibly a wrong term as far as literature. What is this approach? Attitude. So you are right. Thank you. I was thinking more in mutual terms.
If I could respond briefly to Professor Hegde's comments, because it referred to how I was looking at it.
Please go ahead.
Anirban, may I?
Anirban, is he there?
Yes, please go on. Yeah.
Right. So thank you, Professor Hegde. It's nice meeting you virtually. We had a nice time at a pub in South Calcutta some time ago. But yeah, so when I was underlining that part of Prashanta's book, I was basically trying to see how Prashanta focuses on a certain kind of Platonic tradition in Western philosophy, which banishes poetry out of its ideal republic. So it's not that within philosophy there have not been critiques of Western metaphysics of presence and so on and so forth. They would do that. Heidegger would think of the crossed out being and so on and so forth. So that would go in line with the kind of understanding of mutual relationship, mutuality, mutual complementarity relationship of philosophy and literature that you are talking about. And Prashanta's book is very much in line with that kind of thinking. So there is indeed a mutuality in terms of the relationship between philosophy and literature there in Prashanta's book, as well as the way he reads Santayana and Cavell. I think Santayana and Cavell are also philosophers like that. So within Western philosophy, there are these critiques of, foundationalist, essentialist kinds of philosophical traditions. So that's what the book is taking on. It's not so much a journey in a very parochial sense from the realm of philosophy or the philosophical to the literary, but it is certainly something that celebrates the literary turn, as it were, if we can use that kind of a phrase, within philosophical ruminations. That's what I think the book celebrates and underlines. Not essentially, in a very parochial sense, a journey from philosophy to literature. Right? That's what I was trying to underline.
Yeah. Thank you, Kalyan, and nice catching up with you as well. Thank you.
So, Anirban, what do you say now? Shall we hold it, or is there any other questions or comments?
I was just thinking about want to know about your take about the two shorts of doubt. I was thinking of the one is the very a skeptical kind of doubt that you were focusing, and at the same time there is a kind of live and productive kind of doubt that you were also highlighting. Both are they interacting together, or they were enmeshed or entangled? There are any kind of your comment. I look forward to your comments.
Yes, correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm getting you right. The skeptical doubt is about what I mentioned, can you just switch off that? Yeah. So the skeptical doubt is about being misunderstood, right? That is the doubt about communication. But the other thing is not about doubt. If you are referring to drift, are you referring to that part where I talk about hesitation and diffidence and our meandering into something else? Is that what you are referring to, Anirban? The other kind of doubt?
No, I was just referring to the kind of doubt which is productive, and productively actually that is also entangled with the question of unknowing.
Okay, I got you. I think Kollan was referring to that. That is what we call in literature, suspension of disbelief or negative capability. Those of you who are in here in literature, students will immediately understand what I'm trying to say, is that we remain in a position of uncertainty and doubt without hankering for truth, because truth can be of various kinds and so on. But this is not to relativize truth, but to say that there are possibilities, right? So that negative capability is very central to, and Kollan was referring to the Othello example that he gave is about that in a way. Epistemological doubt, rather than you go through doubt and eventually come back to, I'll not call it faith, but I'll call a kind of a lucidity of relationality. That is what literature, and by lucidity I don't mean Sanil is here and I don't mean to keep hatred aside. Hatred is also very lucid, if you like. It takes us directly into something very complicated.
Okay.
Right, that is what I meant, Yeah.
And
Yes.
there was a. Can I just?
Yes.
Yes, please, yeah.
Prasanta, there was just a thought. I mean, while you in the context in which you have made your intervention, I think there is a certain attitude. I mean, you spoke about an aesthetic attitude and so on. Okay, and I was thinking whether in the context of the summations of say both Cavell and Santayana in offer, perhaps an anthropological disposition is what perhaps they're trying to think at. would you say that I know the relationship between anthropology and aesthetics is again an interesting equation, but somewhere along the way, the attention, the forms of attention that one is commanding here, more than being aesthetic, is being anthropological. I mean, would you accept that, or?
I mean, it depends. I mean, I'm not a trained anthropologist, Ashish, so you have to tell me a little bit more. When you say anthropologist, you mean a kind of ancient belief in certain kind of ritual practice and so on? No.
Anthropological in the sense of immersing in forms of life.
Absolutely. Right? Absolutely. Forms of life is so central. Yes.
Yes. So if the anthropological implies a certain immersion in forms of life, the kind of attention that the anthropological demands, I mean, whether one needs to translate that as something set apart from, say, the aesthetic attitude, etc. No, I say this because insofar as Cavell is concerned, at least in fact, a lot of the anthropological, at least from some of the scholars that I have read, the anthropological mediation of philosophy has been through Cavell and Cavell's interpretation of Wittgenstein, right? And I have in mind specifically the work of Veena Das, who actually seeks to translate that quality of attention that is so characteristic of Cavell and Cavell's interpretation of Wittgenstein onto a more anthropological register in terms of trying to think with the subjects that she's immersed in and so on. And I don't think the aesthetic is being invoked at all. No, I'm not. It's not a binary that I'm trying to institute between the aesthetic and the anthropological. But I was saying that would the forms of attention that you're seeking to capture through this juxtaposing of Cavell and Santayana also translate into forms of attention that are more anthropologically grounded than, say, aesthetically positioned?
I would say, sorry, did I interrupt you, Sashit?
No, that's it.
Okay. No, I would say that, my interest in aesthetics is where I first read Cavell's work on as Kalyan said, his literary criticisms on Shakespearean tragedies. Okay, so those are directly literary critical readings. Okay, and then you have all his readings of the movies and comedies and so on, which I found very aesthetically interesting. And then when I read his other works, his PhD work and stuff like that, and then we saw the connection that we are drawing. So my interest was, of course, how to connect these aesthetic concepts that he has with his philosophical, political, approach. But you're right. If this opens up, therefore, Cavell, you're right. Wittgenstein can be taken in several directions. Forms of life is very central to my project, also my work, also because that is an ordinary life, but also not Wittgenstein in the middle. Not the late or early Wittgenstein. In the middle, there are where he interests in psychology and mathematics and so on, where he has certain interest concepts on drift and so on. Those I have interest in those also. So coming back to what you're saying, I'm not, as I said, not a trained anthropologist by any manner. And one could open this up, this relationship, I think, between aesthetics, philosophy, and anthropology. And I would really like to know and love more how anthropologists look at the issue of attention or diversion. What are the kind? I'll be benefited from you if you can give me some directions in this matter.
I look forward to conversations. I also look forward to interacting with Kalyan, of course, as well. Yeah.
Thank you, Shashi.
So thank you all. On behalf of Sahapāthshālā, I would like to extend my thankfulness to the author, Dr. Prasanta Chakravarty, to the distinguished scholars, discussants, Professor Sanil V, Dr. Kullan Kumar Das, and all the distinguished participants who have joined us and made this conversation meaningfully constructive, productive, deeply engaging, and incisively insightful. Thank you all. Thank you.
I must thank you again one more time, Anirban and Sahapāthshālā. It's a fantastic endeavor. Please carry on. All my best wishes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anirban, for inviting me.
Good night to everyone.
Bye-bye.
And thank you, Prasanta, for having written this book. Congratulations.
Yes,
Thank you.
congratulations.
We'll keep talking about it. Thank you. It's a
Sure.
collective.
Very
effort.
good.
Yeah. Bye.